Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sherry.
And together we are
the Traveling Professors.
Today we're going to take you on a walking tour of Pella, the capital city of Macedonia under Philip II and Alexander the Great and others. This was part of a vacation that Sherry and I took at the end of 2018 into 2019, which was really planned to be just a trip to Egypt. But we decided to go ahead and leave the day after Christmas and go into Greece, spend New Year's there, and take a shot at going up and visiting the sites associated with Alexander the Great. And it worked out very well. So I hope you enjoy this trip through Pella. Here is a map of the Greek world after the death of King Philip II in 336 BC. And you can see where the capital of Macedonia, Pella, is located. Now, the capital of Pella was originally built by King Archelaus I to replace his old capital at Algae. He, of course, consulted the Delphi oracle and asked where he should build his new capital. The reply was, "Follow the sheep." Following a flock that he saw outside of his palace, they moved to a spot on the edge of the Thermatic Gulf, which of course now is filled in where Pella is located. And there he founded his city of Pella. In Doric, it means Apella, which means fence for animals. Later it meant wooden bowl, and finally stone. But it peaks under the reign of Philip II through Cassander. One of the problems in the ancient world with cities that were located on seacoasts, which were fed by a river, is that the river eventually fills in their harbor, and they end up being landlocked. For example, if you go to Ephesus, Ephesus was a coastal city. Now the ancient city is 1.5 miles from the sea. If you go to Troy, Troy originally had a bay in front of it. That's completely silted in as a result of 2 other rivers. The same is true with Pella. Pella has multiple rivers, actually 4 of them, that come flowing into the Thermatic Gulf. Now, originally, when the city was first founded, it was on a little island, actually. Then ultimately that was filled in. And then gradually, over the centuries, it gets more and more isolated until ultimately it's not on the Thermatic Gulf anymore. So here are the stages in which Pella gradually becomes landlocked. So when you go to visit the city, you see that it's completely landlocked. But then again, most people, unless they've studied this time period, would not be aware of the fact that originally Pella was on an embayment and had a nice gulf in which to do all their trade. Now here's a modern map of Greece. We flew into Athens 2 days after Christmas, and the next morning we got up and flew to Thessaloniki, and we spent 3 nights in Thessaloniki. That's the second largest city in Greece. We had one day where we had scheduled a tour where we were to go to Pella, Varia, and Vergina. Of course, Vergina is where the tomb of Philip II is located. So it was a nice little tour section that we had booked in advance. Usually when Sherry and I travel, we of course use trains and do our own thing, but sometimes that's not possible. Now you could go to Thessaloniki and rent a car. Real easy to drive around in Greece, but that's not something that I like to do. So I had found a tour company that operated on this trip, and there are only a couple of these places that were open that actually did business, because this is in December, this is almost non-season, and I had made reservations. And so we planned when we were leaving and arriving and moving around based on that day. And when we arrive in Athens, I get an email from the company saying they did not have enough people to take the trip and they were refunding our money and canceling it. Now that's less than 12 hours before we're supposed to get on our plane and go up to Thessaloniki. So we get back online. I find another company and make a reservation. So we head on up there. Here is our tour guide. He works for Ammon Express. And what we found out from our guide is that Ammon Express, when they book your tour, if you're the only person on the tour, they do not cancel. That was one thing that they were very proud of. They're probably the only one that did that. Now, he himself had a doctorate in Greek history and was working on his second doctorate in Byzantine history. The reason was Greece has had a terrible economic time for the last 10 years, and jobs are really scarce. And he told us that the reason he went back for a second degree was he thought it would give him an opportunity to get a teaching job, because there are so few teaching jobs that when they open it up, you literally almost have to be a college professor to get one of those jobs. And they were going to be putting out new jobs the this coming spring that we were there in 2019. He had another month to go on his finish his thesis. So we hope he got his job. He was wonderful. I don't know how everybody else felt about him because him and I talked the whole time. Sherry said it was really funny that because I was very familiar with what he was getting his doctorate in. So the first place that we went was the archaeological site at Pella. So we went to the museum first, and then we went to the Pella site, wandered around the site. And then we drove down to the archaeological site there at Age, which is near Vergina, and we saw Philip's tomb. And so we stopped for lunch, and it's a really wonderful drive. And then he drove us back to Thessaloniki and let us out at the park near where our hotel was, and it worked out wonderful. So the rest of our trip, we will be with him. So I'm going to start a little differently. We're going to do the city of Pella first, then go to the museum. That'll be a separate show. And then there'll be a separate show where we go to Vergina to see Philip's tomb. So let's get started on visiting Pella. Here is the grid plan for Pella. This was created by a gentleman named Hippodamus, and he does it by blocks. Each one of these blocks is 45 meters wide and from 111 to 152 meters long. The most common is 125 meters. And the regular streets are 9 to 10 meters wide, and there's one grand street. It's a 15-meter wide street. And the agora in the center, which is, of course, the trading area, the workshop area of the town, that's 10 blocks. So this is very large. Now, we're going to be in this lower section. I'm going to get to the Temple of Aphrodite just above the north side of the agora, and then we will go in that region and down to the baths. Now, you see the museum, which is a little more than halfway to where the palace is located, and then you have the palace at the top. Now, the palace is very badly destroyed, and it has some archaeological work going there. It's not something that you can tour. As I said before, we started at the museum and then went down to the city. So let's get started. Here we are entering the city of Pella. We're going to head north towards the agora. Now, one of the things that you notice very quickly is it's pretty much flat. The Greek government does not like to build up buildings that weren't really there. They don't want to just manufacture the site. And this site has been devastated over the years. The city was sacked by the Romans in 168 BC, then rebuilt to some extent, and then destroyed in an earthquake in 90 BC. And it never really recovered. By 180 AD, it's just a village. And later, after that period, they refer to it as Diocletianopolis. And during the Byzantine period, it was a simple fortified village, pretty much been destroyed. So we're walking down the main street. As I said before, this thing is 9 to 10 meters wide, and we're heading towards this building that looks like a temple. It is not a temple. That is the house of Dionysius. There are two big houses. There's one on the right side of the road, and there's one on the left-hand side of the road just before you get to the agora. And they are gigantic. That is an entire block. That one block of buildings is one home, and the home across the street, which is the House of Helen, is one full block as well. The House of Dionysius, as I said before, it occupies an entire building block of the city of Pella, and the floors of their symposium rooms were decorated with magnificent mosaics made of natural pebbles, some of which depict scenes that inspired by works of larger scale paintings. Most of the smaller mosaics from this house have been taken, and you will find them in the Museum of Pella. Now, on the way back, when we go to the House of Helen, they are still in place, so we'll get a chance to see those. So we're walking along the road. We see the mosaics here, and this is still part of the house. You see the columns up ahead, so you have the column area, and then you turn on the street here. I'm going to go down the back side of it so we get the back side view. The agora is on the left. This is still the house of Dionysius on the right, and there's as close as you could get to the pillars. And then you go a little bit further to one side, and there is this gigantic floor of mosaics, and a closer view you can see the edging and the pebbles. This is one of the main places to visit, and then once we were finished with this, then I headed off through the agora and to see the Temple of Aphrodite. Here's an aerial view of the House of Dionysius. You can see the pillared area, and then you can see the mosaic floors. You can see where they've removed one of the mosaics, and then you can see how you could get to the back side to get a view of the checkerboarded floor along in here. So that's a nice little aerial view, give you an idea of what it looked like. This aerial view of the agora will give you a little better idea of the size, because once you get on the ground, it is gigantic. This is one of the largest agoras I've ever been to. I thought Delos had a big agora. This is at least 3 times the size of Delos. Places like Ephesus have multiple agoras. Probably all of them together would be bigger than this, but in one central place, when you remember that this is the center of the town. So first of all, let's get our bearings here. Here is the house of Dionysius over here. And then over on this side, we have the house of Helen. So this is the southwest corner right in here. In the southwest corner is where they have the fish markets, the butchers, the shops that sell liquid products, and terracotta figurines. Then you go over to the east wing, and you see it's a lot different look. That's because these buildings have basements on them. The east building, they produce terracotta figurines, and you have the shops as well. There are also pottery workshops that are along in here, so that's quite a bit of industrialization in this particular region. On the west side, over here, which is the most damaged, the west side, where they have the perfume shops, shops selling imported goods such as vases and lamps, terracotta figurines, again, metalworking workshops, and shops that sold cereals. And then the final row, the northwest section here, in the center of it, that is where the city government was located. And there's also a cult section, which is right in here, a religious section. And then the building that you see then further north, that is the covering over what's left of the Temple of Aphrodite. So let's see what it looks like on the ground. The Pella Agora, remember, according to the Hippodamus grid plan, was 10 blocks of the city. I'm over behind the house of Dionysius. I'm on the eastern side of the agora heading north, and that's the section where you find the ceramic workshops where they make terracotta figurines as well as other pottery items. Now here I've climbed on top of the wall overlooking the whole line of pottery shops. Now remember, they have basements, so they would be several levels high. And then here's looking out across the agora to the other side. And as you can see, there's nothing really nothing comes into view. And then here's looking over towards the Temple of Aphrodite. And then we just kind of keep walking down this area. We're coming to the corner. Now here's the corner of the eastern side of the agora, and you can see that set of pillars right there where you have the stairway that goes up that will lead to the Temple of Aphrodite in the back. Off to the left-hand side of it, where you see that wall, that's the cult section. And then here looking down the administrative section, you see the little covering area. That's where the administrative center is located. So you have the cult center, the administrative center, and then there are other buildings on the other side. And then this is looking back from the very top of the administrative wall across to where all of the pottery shops were located. So you can see the expanse of this, and then imagine the number of people, the shops, the noise, the materials that are available to be purchased here, because Philip and Alexander are going to be sending back all kinds of luxury items and trade items to Pella from their conquests. So it is a pretty stunning place when it was in its heyday. Now we come to the sanctuary of the Mother of Gods and Aphrodite. And as you can see, the building, the covering, the protection of it, obviously they want to keep this protected, but there is really very little there except some of the foundation and some debris. And many of the objects that would have been found here are in the museum. So after taking our view here, we turn back around and head towards the administrative center. Back in the agora, time to look at the administrative center, which is the section of the building that's covered. But this also includes the cult area. Literally, this multi-story building. When you say administrative center, that means that 24 hours a day, there is a representative of the city. So that if you have a complaint with one of the businesses in the agora, this is the place that you would go. If you have a complaint about how the material is being weighed, they have the official set of weights. They can go and check it out. Almost every agora in any of the ancient cities has this feature. So this is a very important center. And then cult centers where you can have little worship areas, and then of course the steps that lead up to the Temple of Aphrodite. I'm about a third of the way across the agora, and I thought I'd turn around and take a shot all the way up to the palace. So there's the Temple of Aphrodite, there is the museum, and there's the excavations going on in the palace area. In the far southwest corner of the agora is the public archive, where the documents were logged, the documents were stamped, and all of the records that were being kept. So it was a very important part. And again, it's very much like the Temple of Aphrodite. There's a lot of debris, but they do at least have the walls around it. And it was a multi-story building and would have housed books and other assorted things to keep the records. Right across the street from the house of Dionysius is the house of Helen. And this is the covering that protects the mosaics that are on the floor. And it is called the house of Helen because there's a mosaic in it called the Abduction of Helen. Now here's a picture of one of the mosaics that's in there. It's the stag hunt or the deer hunt. And here is the actual mosaic. And then here is the location for the mosaic of Helen being abducted. And here is Helen being abducted. Now, if you go to visit this place any other time of the year than the time we are, which is winter, you can see them. They're there on the floor. But when you go there in the wintertime, this is what it looks like. They cover them over with sand and dirt to protect them from the elements. So I've had to take some pictures from museums in order to get these particular shots. They've fortunately sold some postcards that had them as well. Now, here is another one, which is the Amazons fighting. That's its location in the building. And of course, there is the mosaic itself. That's a little closer view of the way they cover them over. Now, in the Dionysius house, there were two mosaics that are in the museum. This is one of them, which is Dionysius on the leopard. And then we have the lion hunt, which was removed out of a bigger piece and then put in there for protective purposes. So that's one of the things that I was really looking forward to seeing in situ, in location, but it wasn't. But that's okay. They're being protected. That's the important thing. Our guide was kind enough to take a picture of Sherry and I in front of the House of Poseidon. It's called the House of Poseidon because, like the other houses, they found a mosaic of Poseidon. And you notice that we have on our heavy jackets. It is winter and it was very cold in the northern part of Greece. Actually, Greece was having a very cold winter as far as Missouri standards are concerned, where we get down in the 15 below zero Fahrenheit. It was a nice cool day. It was the wind that cut through us at this site. Our final stop in the city was a block area that was a building that housed mostly pottery shops, but it also had a bath in the back. Now, in the front and the sides of it, they had the kiln area, and they had regions where they worked the pottery. And then when you went further back into the area, you came to these divisions, these areas where you have individual bathing sections, which are quite nice. This is actually a very early bath for this city compared to other towns. It's not a Roman bath by any means. But they have the water that comes in here. They heat the water. Then you have these individual slots, and you have little open areas where you can have music. You can have food being served to you. Very, very nice. We were, by the time we got to this stage of the game, the other people who were on the tour with us had long since given up. But we still had an amount of time that we were able to get down here to the baths. And here's one of the terracotta pipelines that brought water in. But of course, water was a lot closer than it is presently. That completes the walking tour of Pella. I know many people are disappointed when they go to Pella because there's really very little to see other than the expanse and some of the areas. But I'm one of those people that I'm just really glad to have been able to walk the same streets as Alexander the Great, as Philip II, and as many other people. Pyrrhus of Epirus was here many times. It's just sometimes you have big ruins and sometimes you don't. Now we're going to go back to our vehicle, and although we're actually going to be heading to the tomb of Philip, in reality, from our standpoint, now we're going to go to the museum and see all of the spectacular items that have been discovered in this region. So to some extent, this is the first part on Pella. The second part is the Pella Museum, which is well worth the trip. Sherry and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packett on YouTube. It should be History According to Bob, but it comes up as Bob Packett. That's the easiest way to get to it. And please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe, give a comment, and if you like history, please come by historyaccordingtobob.com website, where I do 6 podcasts a week on different topics in history, and there's all sorts of CDs and other things that you can see. So thank you very much.